Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for July 20th, 2022, around 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a lot to talk about today, including the potential for multiple tropical cyclones to be forming in the Atlantic Basin over the next couple of weeks and the potential threats that they would have on the Caribbean and what the rest of the season holds. So let's go jump straight into everything. Taking a walk across the tropical Atlantic this afternoon, we noticed that the basin is pretty quiet right now, which is certainly expected for late July. We do have a pair of tropical waves that are coming off Africa and entering into the Atlantic Basin near the Cabo Verde Islands right here. These waves will be moving westward over the next couple of days, and these are not expected to develop, but will bring some inclement weather to portions of the Lesser Antilles over the next couple of days in the form of some passing showers and thunderstorms with some gusty winds and potential for some heavy rainfall. In the East Pacific Basin, we have Tropical Storm Estelle. It has now weakened back to a tropical storm with sustained winds of about 55 to 50 miles per hour. So this is certainly weakened. It's located about 20.9 degrees north and 120.1 degrees west here. But look at the visible satellite imagery today. We notice that again, the overall system structure is very less defined today. We notice that all of these cumuliform clouds over here in the towards kind of the west of the storm in the East Pacific. This all indicates that we generally have cooler, more stable conditions out across this region. And we notice that there's just not much left in terms of centralized deep convection associated with this storm. And so as this begins to run into the cooler sea surface temperatures even further, this will weaken out. And the official NHC forecast has this becoming a post-tropical cyclone by tomorrow morning around 11 a.m. as it encounters those cooler sea surface temperatures, and no further development of this storm is expected after that time, and it will kind of be left to just weaken out from there. Now, back in the rest of the tropical Pacific, we are also watching a few other systems that might develop. We have another system out here, and the potential for another system to form somewhere back in here over the next couple of weeks. It looks like probably at least one or two more storms in the East Pacific Basin is pretty much a guarantee before things begin to shut off and transfer into the Atlantic Basin. So speaking of the Atlantic Basin, let's go ahead and look at everything here. We actually look at what to expect over the next couple of weeks here. This is basically the threat areas that we will be monitoring for the remainder of the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season. And we noticed that, again, generally speaking, we talked about this over the last couple of days, but there still remains this pretty high risk area from the Lesser Antilles all the way into the southern Gulf of Mexico. And this includes the entire island chain and includes places like Cuba and even Cancun and Jamaica. There is a well above average risk this year of seeing the potential for a strong hurricane, potentially even a major Category 3 to 5 hurricane making its way in the Caribbean this year or being somewhere within that vicinity. It seems more likely this year because of reasons we'll talk about in a minute. And then, of course, we also have that risk extending into the Gulf of Mexico and the entire Gulf Coast states, where, of course, obviously Florida all the way through Texas has that risk of seeing the potential for some significant tropical cyclone impacts this year. And then, of course, we'll be watching this moderate risk as well off portions of the United States Southeast and East Coast as we progress through the remainder of the season. So looking at the overall sea surface temperature around today, we're looking at the global mean sea surface temperature. So this is factoring in the entire globe here. We noticed that we have a couple of very interesting things today. First of all, the deep tropics in the main development region, generally speaking, on average, is running above the long-term average. This is just a slight above average. This is not one of those significant warm years like we've seen in years like 2017 or even, for that example, like 2021, where we saw this pretty profound warming in the deep tropics. But if we actually look at what's going on in the subtropics, we have a relatively cooler than average subtropics, and it generally is below average. And it's been more below average than what we've seen in years, even like 2017, 2020, 2021. All those years had a decently warm subtropical Atlantic. Well, that's not the case this year. The subtropical Atlantic is actually cooler, and what that's going to allow for is the potential for more instability in the deep tropics and really allowing the potential for more tropical cyclone activity to be favored in the deep tropics, and I believe that will be the case. So if we actually look here at the Nino 3-4 index, this is just kind of another index for the El Nino versus La Nina conditions. This is another thing that's going to be favoring the hurricane season being active. It looks like that once again we're firmly still within a La Nina pattern. We briefly went above, just slightly above that 0.5 degrees Celsius threshold for a few days. And then with a renowned easterly wind burst, we pretty much dipped right back down into firm La Nina territory, and we should be staying there really throughout the remainder of the season. And it doesn't really appear as if we will see any significant gains in terms of El Nino for the remainder of the season. So for that reason, the ENSO conditions look to be generally favorable for the remainder of the 2022 hurricane season. And then the Atlantic main development region, once again, it's kind of been an up and down trend. We noticed that generally speaking, we've had these up and down pulses here. And what this has overall led to is a very slow warming trend. You can kind of see that it's kind of just been stationary to where we're at pretty much right now at about 0.2 Celsius above the long-term average. So it's been a very slow trend upwards since May, if we, kind of take an average of that. But the tropical Atlantic is warm, and combine that with some pretty warm and deep upper ocean heat content that certainly favors the Caribbean and the Southwest Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico for the potential of significant hurricanes this season. Now, again, that really doesn't take into account the potential for, wind shear and other things like that. But generally speaking, it seems as if that we will be dealing with the potential for significant tropical cyclones, especially in the Caribbean, and then eventually into the Gulf and potentially even the Southwest Atlantic basin as well. And pretty much everywhere out here where I'm outlining has the potential of seeing some pretty substantial hurricanes as the temperatures are now warm enough. And if the thermodynamic environment kind of cooperates and the wind shear department cooperates, we could be in for a pretty long season. Now, the upper level pattern for the remainder of the season as well is also something to kind of take note of. This is the CANSIPS forecast. This is the 500 millibar potential for the geopotential heights here. So we're looking at the strength of the ridge at about 18,400 feet in the atmosphere. This is valid as of August. We notice that, generally speaking, we have a pretty deep and robust North Atlantic ridge here. This basically prevents tropical cyclones from recurving as easily and away from sea. It still can happen, but it generally just doesn't happen as prevalently. And if we continue that into September, we still kind of get that same look here, although it is shifted a bit further towards the west. Now, we do have some troughing over here, and if we get any troughing, upper latitude troughing, it might be able to break down this ridge enough with individual storms and favor recurves, but obviously the general pattern seems to favor land impacts this season. And that is why, again, going back to the graphic here, there's a pretty substantial risk for the Gulf and the Caribbean because of that ridging in the upper levels this season. So when could we start seeing the storms actually come? Well, this is the GFS forecast. This is the run from yesterday. Actually, really was initialized on the 18th, but this is the overnight runs from yesterday. And we're looking at the mean sea level pressure anomalies here, so departures from average. And what we're really looking for is, again, any sustained period of below average pressures. And we actually do see that is coexisting in the Atlantic Basin for the next about week or so, about through July 28th. We see these pressures below average that potentially allows for some tropical development to occur. If we actually look at the precipitable water content here, we notice that there actually is a pretty robust pocket of moisture with a tropical wave that is expected to emerge off the coast of Africa within the next couple of days. This is within the next about 4 days. On July 24th, we have a tropical wave that could be emerging off the coast of Africa, and some development thereafter is possible. But there will be a lot of dry air that will be punching in from both sides of the system. But the upper level environment isn't all that unfavorable. There actually is pretty favorable and light shear environment, at least for the next while, and that will continue really throughout the entire period, we actually remain with a pretty well below average shear value in especially in the eastern main development region. And then if we look at the European ensembles, it's kind of much of the same thing here. Then the European ensembles, generally speaking, remain below average in terms of the pressure anomalies that decreases the trade winds and increases warming and the potential for tropical cyclones to develop. The long-range GFS ensembles here are picking up on some potential areas of low pressure, especially out in the long range, beginning around the August 15th timeframe. Again, that's pretty long range, but we'll see if that certainly comes to fruition. So once again, the bottom line is if you live in the Caribbean this year and, of course, the Gulf of Mexico states, you should be extra preparing for the potential for tropical cyclone impacts, especially within the next about 2 to 3 months. It seems like will probably be our peak in terms of impacts to those areas. And then if you live along the United States East Coast and Southeast Coast, including like Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, all the way through New York and Philadelphia and Washington and Norfolk, again, it is just something to kind of keep in mind. You are in that moderate risk, an above average category for impacts this year, so it is important to always be prepared and stay alert for rapidly changing conditions. All right, so that being said, I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. Of course, I am Michael O'Malley, and I'll talk to you guys again some more tomorrow.